All right, we're going to kick off today's discussion on whether technology can revamp the learning process. I'm Adam Nordine. I work with Barclays Capital, and I manage the education and education technology practice on the investment banking side. Thank you, everybody, for being here today. I want to kick off just by talking about a little bit of introductory comments. We'll introduce the panel briefly and then get straight into a discussion. But over the past decade, there's been about $3 billion that have been invested in early stage growth capital for the education sector on the technology side specifically. And people have different ideas as to why that is. Some people think it's a sector that's drastically in need of improvement. Some people think that it's a sector that really has no limits in terms of aspiration. We all know that it's a sector that really is very collaborative, and collaboration gives better rise to innovation, broadly speaking. But notably, if you look at the past 3 or 4 years, the vast majority of capital has been deployed in that period. So since 2009, funding on an annual basis has doubled nearly every year to present. In 2012, there were 5 times the amount of dollar investments into education technology than a decade ago. And in 2012, over $1 billion alone was raised for education technology. You see some of the largest VC names in the Valley, individual entrepreneurs, all investing. Education technology has become mainstream from what was a very niche kind of practice. And so the question is, what's different about that today? Is it because technology is more powerful? Is it because there's a greater sense of urgency? Have behavioral norms changed in a way where education in the future will look different than we all experienced it on a permanent basis? And has technology enabled us really to understand the learning process better itself? So the potential for technology to transform learning has a variety of different facets for discussion. Today's panel includes a diverse set of participants who will consider those questions, other questions, and your questions from a company perspective. Starting on my right here, John Barber is the CEO of Leapfrog Enterprises. Leapfrog is one of the pioneers at the intersection of technology and education, founded in 1995. It really set the stage with products like the LeapPad that made learning fun. And today, Leapfrog is very well recognized within the edutainment category for high quality, highly effective learning products. Next, Nolan Bushnell. Nolan is a member of both the Video Game Hall of Fame as well as the CES Hall of Fame. He's best known as the founder of Atari and Chuck E. Cheese's, where I spent the vast majority of the 1980s. But he also has founded more than 20 companies over his career, most recently as chairman and CEO of BrainRush. And BrainRush is a gaming education company that uses a technology called adaptive practice to measure and optimize learning in a video game-like setting. On my left is Mike Moe. Mike is a co-founder and CEO of GSV Capital. GSV is the first publicly listed entity that allows people on an individual basis to invest in VC and early stage growth companies. A significant amount, about 1/3 of their capital, is invested in education technology. Today, GSV is invested in more than 40 companies, many of which are leaders in the education technology space. Mike was previously a founder of Think Equity, which is a boutique investment banking and capital management firm. And he was a II ranked education analyst with Merrill Lynch. For those of you who don't know Wall Street parlance, II means you're the best. Lastly, Ron Packard. Ron's the CEO and founder of K12. And Ron, I recall, founded K12 based off of his own personal experience in the K12 sector in 1999, and has really become the singular force behind the concept of the virtual public school, the virtual academy. Today, K12 is the largest operator of virtual public schools and academies and blended K-12 schools, which combine traditional study and online learning in the world. They work with public schools, they work with private schools, and on a direct-to-consumer basis. So with that, let's just dive in and talk about, first, just this interest, the acceleration of interest in education technology. And Mike, I'm going to start with you. What do you think has really sparked so much interest in technology and learning in the past 3 or 4 years?
Well, I think, as you referenced, it's been a huge acceleration of investment in this category. And I think what conceptually got people interested is, is true today and it was true 10 years ago, and that's in the global marketplace and knowledge-based economy education increasingly is making a difference not only how an individual does, but how a company does, and for that matter, how well a country does. So classic investment opportunities when there's a problem, a solution to that problem. That's, I think, the conceptual thing. What's changed, and you made the reference to all of a sudden, you do have the Sand Hill Road VCs, the guys that are always early and usually right, the Kleiner Perkins and the benchmarks and the Andreessen Horowitzes who are very active in the market. I think that signals something. And then the question is why. And I think it's a confluence of factors, including you've had these IT tracks that have been laid over the past 40 years, last 20 years. The internet, you now have 2.5 billion people on the internet globally. You have 500 million iOS devices by Apple sold in the past 5 years. You got this huge app economy. There's a panel going on somewhere down the halls about that. There's 90,000 education apps, right? And so you've got this rich infrastructure. You got 1.1 billion people on Facebook. So all of a sudden you've got this incredible opportunity to reach people very quickly. And so education historically from an investment standpoint has been where you could have growth, but you couldn't see this hyper growth. Mm-hmm. And so now you're starting to see business models, what I call weapons of mass instruction. And by that, what that means, you're seeing these businesses go from idea to millions and tens of millions of users like this. And so you've got Khan Academy, 240 million courses over the past 24 months. You've got Coursera, over 3 million students in 18 months. You've got Edmodo, nearly 20 million students. You got Newton, who's going to have 5 million students, up from 500,000. So you got these exploding business models, and that growth and that rapid growth, I think, is what has got the Silicon Valley investors jazzed up.
So you've got infrastructure and you've got capital, but how about talent? It seems like the ed tech sector is really attracting talent at a faster pace than ever before.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, I wish this was my comment, but Kleiner Perkins, has made the point that one of the best indicators of an industry, taking off is looking at where the talent's going. We've never seen an inflow of talent like you're seeing come into the education market today. It's incredible. You were at the conference we were at a week and a half ago. I mean, these incredible people that would have gone into a lot of different industries are coming into the sector in waves, and that's very exciting.
Attending 2 conferences in 3 weeks is not the norm for me. Nolan, how would you compare this to the first wave of innovation? If you think back to kind of the mid and late 90s into 2000, you were very much steeped there. Is this a fact that technology is better, or is it that we feel a greater sense of urgency about what we can do with the technology now, or is it the people themselves?
Well, I think right now we have a perfect storm in which the networks are robust, the hardware is cheap, and the software is getting really, really good. And it's not just good because it's cool and got pretty pictures, but there's some really underpinnings of brain science that we didn't know about before. And so now we've got all these things together, sort of creating this perfect witch's brew of massive effectiveness. And I tried to put computers in my son's school 10 years ago. And it was worthless to have a network unless you had an IT guy sitting in the back of the room, because to keep X number, 30 PCs going at that time, I mean, a 14-year-old that can shut down the network by putting a pin through the Cat5 cable, it's not he's a bad guy, but that's really cool if you can shut the network down. And so now we have things where all that's remediated. And we have this ability to make things happen. And the analogy I made at lunch was, we have this block that's stuck in ice, and which is the school system. And then we have additional pressure every year being placed on that block. And what happens? When that block breaks loose, all hell breaks loose, because all of that built-in things. And I think within 3 years of the block breaking loose, and the world will fundamentally change in education. And I think that's also fueling some of the things, because we can all see it happening. It's happening in front of our eyes.
Let's go a little deeper on that pressure, because I think it really goes to constituents. And so you've got teachers, you've got parents, you've got students. When you think about the potential for technology in education and transforming the learning process over the next 3 years, how much is it about what technology can do? Because we do have, excellent software, great technology infrastructure, cheap tablets and so forth, but oftentimes it's limited by how much people are willing to do with technology.
Well, I think what we have is a focus on many times the wrong problems. There's a lot of focus on training teachers better as opposed to making teachers' jobs easier. And McDonald's does a great hamburger. To some, my wife doesn't think so, but that's another story. But not because they have great cooks but they have a really simple system so that anybody of meager capabilities can create a good hamburger. Now, I don't want to say I don't want to depreciate a teacher, but for example, let's not have teachers grade anymore. We can figure efficacy by a whole bunch of areas, and teachers spend a tremendous amount of time grading kids, which leads us to the question, what is an easy teacher? If they're not grading, what is an easy teacher? It's one that's really communicating. So sometimes when you change these metrics, you change a whole ecosystem of expectations, realities, what have you. I've always said, our school system should have no grades and no grades, i.e., having things that are based on trips around the sun is really wrong because we have massive differences in maturity levels, pre-learning issues. I mean, I believe that 90% of the poverty, the disparity in the poverty level is the kids who enter the school system at 6 years old from a poverty school don't have the experiences, the life experiences that the kids that had a more rough. If you just move that off 2 years with a good, kindergarten, all of a sudden outcomes can be better. And no grades, learn to mastery. And it doesn't matter when. If you get rid of the idea of age, and if you get rid of the idea of A, B, C, D, and you just learn to mastery, all of a sudden you get a whole bunch of different dynamics that set up. And that's kind of where I believe that we're heading with some tremendously better outcomes.
Let's take a couple of those concepts. Ron, you guys deal with many students who come from challenging environments. How does technology level the playing field?
Well, it levels it in many ways. Probably the biggest way is with the public virtual schools. Now you have the first kind of public school that any child in the state can access, and it's free to them. And they get usually a computer and internet connection. So all of a sudden, for the first time really in the history of mankind, people without economic means have choice. The second thing, which is equally important, is I think one of the things technology does is it individualizes education, and it also makes it more engaging. We've had a lot of success putting our curriculum into brick and mortar schools, and what it does is two things. One is it engages the students. The second thing it does is, particularly in math and science in the elementary school levels, teachers don't have math science degrees. So all of a sudden they're able to teach math science and teach it correctly. So if you can elevate teaching quality and you can increase student engagement, by definition you'll have success, because I think generally those are the two most important variables in determining student quality. So by providing access to the best things for everybody, elevating teacher quality, it's going to has potential to have tremendous effects on poor schools. I mean, to give you an example, there's a school in Mississippi. It was called Combe Elementary School. It was literally written up by the Washington Post as the worst school in the United States. Literally the worst. And we were able to go in there with math, science, Basel curriculum using interactive whiteboards and provide a trainer. Keep the same teachers, the same principal, same kids. That school went from 10% kids proficient to 70% within 2 years on math and science, without changing anything, without changing union agreements or any of those things. We've done that 7 times. We've done it in DC, we've done it in Philadelphia, we've done it in rural Mississippi. It works everywhere. And the key is you can use technology to engage kids, and you can give these teachers the right instructive, didactic tools in order to engage the learner, and it makes a massive difference.
I think it's a good example too. You might just share a little bit about what you're doing in Chicago with the hybrid schools.
That's a great example. So in Chicago, and we have a school in Chicago that's designed specifically, I always kind of quip, it's the most selective school in the country, and that you have to have been a dropout 6 months earlier in order to get in. So unless you've dropped out 6 months ago, you cannot get into the school. And what that school basically does is it takes kids who have been out in the real world, they figured out they want a high school diploma, there's something they need it for, and they come back in. Often it's girls who got pregnant, had children, it's kids who come from gangs, a lot come from jail. And literally that school is now graduating 90% plus of these kids, and 60% are going to post-secondary. And what that school is able to do using technology is give these kids the flexibility so that they can take part of it online and part of it in the center. The second is that we can surgically repair transcripts. So the problem is if you're 19 years old and you failed freshman English, it's hard to get freshman English, right? The parents of the 14-year-olds don't want you in that class, and you particularly don't want to be in a class with 14-year-olds, so you're basically done. And by being able to do that online, we can take that away, and we may have 50 kids in a room working on courses. They could literally be working on 50 different courses. So we can actually say, this is where you are today, this is what you want to be. We get all the social services for them that they're entitled to get, and we map out what they need to do, and they will go on, and the school's having amazing success. And that's the power of online. It's anytime, anywhere, and we can amalgamate numbers. So if you have one student in a school who wants to take, Chinese 5, we can offer it. And that's one of the great powers of what technology's enabled.
Thank you. John, Leapfrog's been involved both on the consumer side and on the institutional side, but early success very much on the consumer side of the market. How would you compare the adoption cycles for consumer versus institutional? Because we do see different phases of momentum.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's important to recognize that children are learning virtually every minute they're awake. It's not just at school. They're learning in everything they do, and it's important to touch them right through their daily lives. What we do at Leapfrog is we create entertainment for children that's just as compelling, just as engaging as regular entertainment, but is filled with the nutrition of education, right? And I think if you look at it in terms of whether it's through schools or whether it's after school, we have the same consumer and the same customer, children and parents. We have the same goals, right? When you really sit back and think about it, the best teachers we had when we were children were teachers that cared for us and made the lessons interesting, right? That's what we do. We create interesting education for children. Secondly, by use of technology, right? If you look at the ultimate learning experience, it's a one-to-one tutor. Many people in this room had one-to-one tutors. Oh my goodness, you're brave even admitting it, eh? Right? The fact is, I don't think there's anybody in Scotland that ever had a one-to-one tutor, right? Right? But it's been proven that if you have a one-to-one tutor, you're at like 98% percentile of traditional learning. Technology allows us to deliver these individual learning experiences for children with auto-leveling in there, right? And different components to help the child learn at their rate, because every child learns things at different rate. And lastly, consumers are looking for an opportunity for a feedback loop, right? Parents want that opportunity to find out how is their child doing? What are the things they could be working on? What are they learning? So all of those things are the same whether you deliver them through a school or whether you deliver them through a regular consumer business. Okay? The difference for me is, in my businesses, I have to deal with kind of two big decision makers. The parent or the caregiver, one, and Walmart, right? Mm-hmm. Most of the people here in the education business, I don't know who makes the decision, in all sincerity. My big observation is there's way too much politics in education in America. You got school teachers, you got principals, you got supervisors, you got regional support, you got state support, you got the national government. Who makes the decisions here? Right? So in our business, to be frank, I think it's far easier for us to go deal with Walmart and deal with the parent and deliver our education than have to go spend the time, because unfortunately, in my view, we have a crisis. Tony said it best this morning. We have a crisis. Wake up and smell the coffee. All right? I'm not sure if our business was just focused on school business, whether we would get to where I would want to be in terms of changing children's lives in my lifetime. And that is scary. So our focus is predominantly in the consumer.
Mm-hmm. Ron, let's talk about that sensitivity, just because you may as well put it on the table. Within the institutional K12 system, there are many constituents, there are layers of decision making. All are well intended, but it leads to conflict in interest and ultimately potentially difficulty in penetrating. Layer on to that the fact that there is always a subtle tension of being involved in the education market if you make profit. And so people recognize you need to be a responsible partner to the educational system, but how do you think about overall addressing those challenges to achieve the scale that you have, and how might things have changed, say, 13, 14 years ago when your business was starting to where we are today?
Well, that's a loaded question. So I'd start with, I think one of the reasons that we were able to be so successful and scale the way we have is we were able to, parents wanted what we had. And at the end of the day, these parents spoke up for their children and what they wanted for their kids, and they were able to really have a lot of legislative change happen in the U.S. And the empowerment of parents is one of the forces that no one really talks about. But I think, in the 70s, clearly people just sent their kids to school and never worried about it. There was no after-school tutoring programs or any of these things. In the last 30 years, when you look at the homeschooling movement, charter schools, parents have become empowered. And they become a force, and they realize that their local school may not be the best thing for their child. So we were able, through that parent empowerment, to be able to actually build a large company. When we actually go to sell to school districts, it's a whole other thing. And the complexity of the distribution, the sales process, the cycle time, it's why you ended up with 3 textbook manufacturers. The expense it takes to actually sell to school systems is enormous, and there's very few things that are more resistant to change than the education system. I think I always say is everyone's in favor of change there as long as everything stays the same. And I think that's kind of been the observation. So we really were probably $400 or $500 million of revenue before we really felt we had the size and stamina to actually go really start selling to school systems. As a for-profit company, you're automatically, it's harder. You see government grant programs that you're not eligible for no matter how good your stuff is. So I think there's a huge bias against that, but at the end of the day, being a for-profit company, it allows you to scale. It allows you to attract human and financial capital. And I think and we're driven towards efficiency and providing better outcomes. I can't find a single instance going back as far as records exist where competition has ever done anything but provide the consumer with a better product at a better price. And so we constantly drive to providing more for students. So I think the opposite of what you're accused of actually happens, right? Mm-hmm. That the way the culture works is we get better every year, and it's an incredibly Silicon Valley ethic drive to deliver more for students. So you have to be able to take all that. That's why when I look at all these startups, I sat there and listened to them in Phoenix, and I hadn't felt that way since 2000, like someone actually funded that. Because the complexities of the distribution are so large. Amazing, people don't seem to quite grasp that. I think it's going to break down eventually. I think the technology is going to be allowed to distribute a different way, and that whole feet on the street is going to go away. But it's not going to happen overnight. This is going to be a long process. Things like textbook adoption. It makes no sense in a digital world. The power of digital content is you can change it daily. The power of adoption is you keep it still for 7 years. So I think a lot of it's going to break down, but it's going to happen slower than people think. Mm-hmm. But I'm more excited about the tablets and mobile computing because I think people are going to demand their education everywhere, right? Not just in the classroom, the PC, but you want it on your mobile device, you want it on your tablet. And I think it's going to happen, but there is a lot of resistance to change like nothing anyone's ever seen in most
Mike,
industries.
Since you're in the business of investing in these kinds of companies, and hundreds were at your conference, how do you think about that and sort of the potential and the opportunity for many of these innovative ideas relative to what may be some headwinds in terms of the infrastructure that resists change?
Yeah, so I talked about some of the things that have changed. Some other things that I think are pretty fundamental, which you didn't speak to, but is nonetheless important. One is this whole evolution of charter schools, which just started 20 years ago. Now, you've got 6,000 of them, 2 million students, $20 billion market, and these charters have been early adopters for innovative technology, and that helps create change. Mm-hmm. You got, I remember I gave testimony in 1998 to Congress about education technology and what some of the impediments were. Well, you had one computer for every child, and you had no schools had internet connectivity. But the biggest problem was 80% of the teachers were actually scared of using technology in the classroom. That's completely flipped. I mean, most of the teachers today are digital natives. They grew up, with technology. They expect it. Mm-hmm. And so, but you asked the question, what we're seeing, and why we're excited. And we have a fund. We have our largest investments, Twitter, and we're an investor in Dropbox. And we have a bunch of exciting companies in our portfolio. But why 30% are invested in education and technology is because we're seeing just enormous potential. A lot of these barriers, broken down. And so, whether it's business models where you're seeing network effects or where you can actually see freemium models because you have a concept called knowledge as a currency, which I can talk about more maybe in a little bit. Mm-hmm. you're starting to see this really exceptional growth. I mean, the fact of the matter is what Ron did at K12 is nothing short of spectacular in terms of the growth that they've achieved and the business model that they pioneered. But the pioneers get the arrows, right? Yeah, but the ones that survive get all the land, and here he is standing. So
barely standing.
You still look good, Ron.
yeah.
So well, I think there's been a few different dimensions in which technology is helping to transform education, and so maybe we can talk about a few of those. One is in cost reduction, and so whether that's just in addressing fiscal challenges or in freeing up capital to reinvest in other areas of education, that can be powerful. The second area might be in the ability of technology to both transcend geography or shift time. And Ron, I know students are doing both of those with your solutions. And the third is really just in technology itself improving the learning process. And perhaps a subset of that is understanding the learning process. So maybe let's take each of those in order and just talk about where you may be seeing those aspects in your businesses. And so cost reduction, I'd say, John, from the consumer side, you mentioned Walmart. There's obviously a significant element of cost savings there. When you think about the consumer purchase decision, so the need for parents, their desire to help their student achieve, how much does cost matter in that market?
I think, especially in a tough economy, cost always matters, but it's really about value. Now, let's not kid ourselves. Every kid in America wants one of these, right? But every 18-year-old wants a Ferrari. And a Ferrari is just as well designed for an 18-year-old as this is for early childhood development, right? On the other hand, this is the best-selling tablet for young children in America. It's $99, and that's where the cost effectiveness has helped. The differences between this and this is not just the content that plays with it, but you can't do that with that, right? And have it still ticking, right? Because that's real life, right? And this is for children, early childhood development for kids above the age of 3. So cost and componentry has helped us deliver these incredible experiences that, to be frank, were probably powering spaceships 20 years ago, right? In addition, the cost of developing entertainment. I give you a great example of this. The first DVD we ever produced is a DVD called The Letter Factory. Go look at it at Amazon.com. The Letter Factory is the best way to teach phonics to your children out there, right there today. Letter Factory was produced for probably 1,000th of the cost of creating a Pixar movie. Yet today, it has more 5-star ratings on Amazon.com than any Pixar movie ever made. It's not about the cost. It's about the science and the art of creating incredible entertainment that engages children, that compels them, and at the same time finding a way to build the education wound into it that changes children's lives. So as costs continue to drop in terms of technology or in terms of the cost of producing entertainment, then we will be able to continue to deliver these truly life-changing experiences. I mean, I have examples right now of letters from parents whose children were having a problem at school. They were being ostracized. They were being picked on. And they bought either a tag or they bought a leap pad or they bought the Letter Factory, and they started to get more confidence and they started to become part of the class again. That's changing children's lives. Yeah. That's having an impact.
Absolutely.
That's what we do every single day. Every single person that works at Leapfrog is driven by helping children achieve their potential. And the more that costs drop and the more that we can drive that, the more children we can have an impact on. So I would say cost reductions are having a dramatic impact in our business and the way that we can save children's lives.
And Nolan, what's your perspective? Many of your products run through tablets and through small apps.
Yeah, well, we design video games to be addictive. And we never admit to that. But it turns out that the tools that we use to make them addictive are easily adaptable to learning. And that's really sort of the center of gravity. I mean, passive is over. When you listen to a lecture, you watch a movie, even read a book, that's passive. It's not going through your thalamus, it's not active engagement. If you're not active, your learning experience is maybe 10% as effective as if you're being asked to make cognitive decisions going through that. So we know that now. Why do we still have lectures? why are you sitting here listening to me talk? It's passive. I should be having you reach your hand, tap your foot, stand up and down. Then you might be able to remember what I'm saying. But I'm going to try to make it so damn compelling that you'll remember it anyway. Anyway, we believe that all of these things are fixable. And, for example, going through the schools, I'd rather put a needle in my eye. What you do is you got to go around and you got to be a stealth fixer. How do you do that? Well, our stuff is free. Do you know what we did for our first marketing program? 1 email spam. And our test was Spanish vocabulary. We ended up with a customer acquisition cost of 2 cents. Now, I don't care what business you're in, if you can get a customer acquisition cost of 2 cents, you've got a business, okay? Then, it's free, and you say, well, okay, that's all wonderful. How do you make money? Well, guys, don't worry about me. I'll be able to do that quite fine, but essentially you have a paywall. Most of your content's free, and for a gem or two, maybe you can get something that you might really want. And then you ask your parents, or you ask, your teacher, because we'll probably give a bunch of gems to teachers to give out at random times. And maybe even you can get a few gems from Shell Oil or AT&T. And so you get an ecosystem that's working. And I can tell you right now that the freemium model creates $1 billion for Zynga. And I actually believe there's going to be more people interested in teaching their kids and helping their kids with things than raising virtual cows. And if I'm right, I'm going to have a business.
Ron, you described previously just how K12 really unlocked the ability for students anywhere in the country to participate in the K12 system in a very high quality way. Maybe you can talk a bit about some of the things that you guys are doing that in particular form an interrelationship between shifting time and savings cost, where you're effectively freeing up one of the great constraints that exists for expansion and improvement of the US K-12 system, which is infrastructure.
Sure. So it's interesting you asked that. Infrastructure, we save it a lot of ways. I mean, if every child in the U.S. were in a K-12 virtual school, the system would save about $300 billion. But that'll never happen because the schools provide something called custodial. So you can't have all kids in virtual schools. And second, it's not necessarily right for every child. So one of the keys to education is the one-size-fits-all has been the fundamental problem. And at the end of the day, what schools, districts need to think about is providing a whole series of options because children learn differently and different options work for every child. Infrastructure is really interesting because one of the hypotheses I have is over the next decade that all electives will go online. That there's no reason to have an elective taught in a brick and mortar classroom for a couple of reasons. One is it limits the number of electives. Students might as well be able to take thousands of courses. Why should we limit them to 10 or 20 different electives? If you want to come out of high school Oracle certified, come out Oracle certified. So we can now, by amalgamating students from each school, we can create course catalogs that will have thousands of courses. The second is by high schools moving the electives online, they can then go down to 4 core courses where people take on site. They can concentrate on the 4 primary subject areas. Well, guess what? Now we can double shift high schools. So now you've doubled the capacity of the U.S. high school system. LA Unified, I think, spent $500 million on one of their last high schools. So all of a sudden, that $15 billion we're spending on real estate every year goes away, and we've doubled our system's capacity. So by taking some of the courses online, you leverage the infrastructure incredibly. The other thing you'll eventually also do is you'll be able to scale teachers more. So the teacher shortage has been forecast forever won't happen because you'll be able to actually have teachers teach more students and get better results. And guess what? When teachers teach more students, you can pay teachers more. So you solve a lot of issues with when you can actually scale infrastructure and you can scale human capital. Interesting enough, over the last 50 years, there's now twice as many adults in the system per child as there were in 1960. So education, and you say SAT scores are flat. So let's assume productivity output's the same. We've now lowered the productivity in the education system literally by 50%. It's stunning. I mean, I can't find any other industry like that. I mean, over the same period, steel industry's gone up by 1,200%. You know, we produce more steel than we did in the heyday of U.S. Steel. We just do it with 1/10 the people. So the ability to leverage productivity and leverage infrastructure is extraordinary. Across the country, we're able to operate schools at somewhere between 60% and 80% of what a traditional school operates at. And by the way, that's even true in the flex environments, where we can get leverage by having the electives brought in online, and we can use real estate more efficiently. So it's going to have a huge effect on not only cost, but also quality.
Absolutely.
I agree 100% with what you just said. It's really, what he just articulated is part of the economic driver that is going to really make it happen very quickly.
And the comments here have been largely around early learning and K-12. Mike, I know you've been involved with both proprietary and nonprofit models in higher ed. What have your observations been around the embracement of technology and these kinds of dimensions of cost reduction or shifting time, space, those kinds of things?
Well, first of all, we've got to acknowledge there's a gigantic problem with just the cost of higher education and access. I mean, there's $1 trillion student loan debt. The average student coming out of school has $25,000 of debt, and by the way, 50% can't get a job within 12 months after graduating, a bunch of, on and on and on. And so one of the biggest issues, historically, there was this equation that said the more you paid for something, the more it was worth in the education market. And of course, that's absurd, but that's the way the market has always worked. What's happening now, it's about what I call knowledge as a currency. It's about knowledge, not college. It's about what you not know, not where you go. And so the ability to demonstrate what you know, and I think Ron talked about having these different competencies, people are going to be able to create their own knowledge portfolios, and that's what's going to give them the ticket to opportunity. So you look at these MOOCs, which I hate the word, but it's really cool what they're doing. and basically what they're doing is, it's democratizing access to knowledge. And that's a big deal. And I think, again, as long as you can put a currency with that, right, that's going to be a big deal, and that's transformative. And we're very excited about that.
But what you're really talking about is the move from a credentialed society to a merit society.
Yeah, so I think this degree historically was your access, your ticket to a future.
Your credential.
Sure.
Your credential. And I think you're going to go through this iterative process of a certification and badges and all this stuff, but ultimately, it's just going to be big data and everything else. It's going to be able to show what you know, and your knowledge portfolio is what's going to give you access to opportunities in the future. And importantly, no longer are you going to be able to just fill up your knowledge tank to age 25 and drive off through life, but you're going to continually need to be able to get that knowledge you need to stay relevant in a dynamic society.
Nolan, let's talk a little bit more about technology and the learning process. So what kinds of things has technology enabled in terms of brain science, understanding the nature of the learning process, maybe even the nature of conditions precedent, and how that impacts learning?
Well, I actually have a project right now. Our software gives me a piece of data that I don't think is available anywhere else. And that is, how long, within a few seconds, did it take you to learn something? Aggregate. So I can take kids and say, okay, for the last hour, it took you on average 23.4 seconds to learn something, or 2 minutes, 40 seconds to learn a particular item of a certain class. Then the question is, what did you have for breakfast? Was this 10 o'clock in the morning or 3 in the afternoon? Did you exercise before you came to school? And I believe that we need to look at education the way we look at athletics and fine-tune the student chemically, physically, and we fine-tune them through what you have for breakfast. Now, when you do a Google search on what should you have for breakfast, wow, it's a tsunami of bad information. and there's a whole bunch of opinion and no data, zero data. And you say, how can this be? And then you say, how much exercise should you have before you take a test? Zero data, a lot of opinion. And I believe that in the next year, we can answer a lot of these questions. How much exercise should you have? We know that the more exercise, that on a double-blind test, kids who exercise 20 minutes before a test and the kids who crammed do 15% better. Okay, we know that. But how much exercise? What's the right amount? What's the right time of doing it? All that. High protein, high carb. We know that you can have a carbo letdown sometime. Maybe it should be, and there's one guy, and I kind of believe, says that 10 o'clock everybody should have sardines, dark chocolate, and green tea. Hopefully not all together. But, maybe what we do is we have a good breakfast, a nice, a nice snack, an appropriate lunch. And then remember in kindergarten when you had nap time? 20-minute nap after lunch, man, that's really good. NASA has done all kinds of studies that say we should do it. Are kids doing that? No. So we know the answers. Let's just start doing it. But let's find and get some granularity to it. And let's match it with DNA. Let's match it with blood type. Let's match it with bodies, BMI, various things. I think we can fix this thing by just being a little bit scientific. And hate to say it, I don't know how many of you guys have been in the education field, but it sucks. All the good science is coming out of neurobiology and the psychology side of the environment. Why doesn't education know this? They're all about process. What a waste. Really pisses me off.
Just to jump on the process versus the evidence, right? And I do think something that I'm very passionate about, and we're trying to make this to be sort of the scorecard, is what we call ROE, or return on education. Mm-hmm. So this whole, and Ron made the point, for some reason for-profit is controversial in this market. How absurd. That actually people are being compared, they're good because they're not for-profit, or they're bad or because they're for-profit. What should matter is the ROE. What kind of learner impact is being achieved, and what's it cost, and how's that increase access? The corporate structure, just is the most absurd concept in the world. And so I think increasingly, again, is focused on can a company, whether it's through technology or through service, is able to deliver tangible learner outcomes.
Yeah.
And what's it cost to do that? Mm-hmm. And that to me, that's what the focus needs to be on, not kind of all these silly arguments that go on.
And rationalize it across private, and public, and for-profit. It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. The whole distinction is just like, are you kidding me? You go to a hospital. There are a lot of for-profit hospitals, a lot of not-for-profit hospitals. Nobody cares if it's for-profit or not-for-profit. They care if you get well, right?
Right.
When you're getting treated for this whole process issue, you get cancer until they go through a process. Well, what matters is the drug, is it efficacious or not?
Right.
What's it cost, and does it deliver results? That's the mindset that has to be created.
So Ron, you guys have put close to $300 million into the development of curricula and the underlying analytics. Mm-hmm. John, you guys have been at this for 17 years now?
18 years,
18 years. How do you think about that? Is there a big data play in how people learn and how you can make learning better? Can we use everything we know about algorithms, about analytics, about artificial intelligence, to apply it to the actual experience so that we can understand it in an outset, but over a longer period of time, make it real-time, diagnostic, prescriptive, and more effective?
Well, there's no question you can. It's just how long does it take that to develop, and can you actually build a business doing that? But we're already doing it, and one of what we're very excited about is as you move to more adaptive learning, you're able now to take kids through courses where you may have 100 kids going through a course and they're going through 100 different pathways depending on how quickly they're mastering it. So I've always thought about it for a long time, since even before I started K12, and something I call learning efficiency ratio, is how much time do you spend on something and what do you learn? And I remember the same 6-year-old girl who inspired me to start K12. I remember going through some of the software there, and she spent 2 hours and she learned the letter B. I could have taught her that in 2 minutes, just going B is buh. And so, it's incredibly inefficient. It was fun and engaging, but for the sake of being that. So I think what we're going to be able to measure is, for example, you can throw up 3 different lessons for a course, and you can absolutely measure how long it takes a series of students in a statistically valid sample to master that lesson. So by continually doing that and offering up different learning methodologies, you're able to actually figure out which is the most efficient and continually do that. And if you do that over literally the thousands of lessons you'll go through in a year, you can make learning dramatically more efficient. So I think there is a data play, and I think it's going to be important to analyze it, but it's going to take a while, because one of the things, I spent a lot of time in the pharmaceutical industry in my McKinsey days, and they had very precise metrics and rubrics, and there's no double random blind placebo studies in education. There's very few of them, but you actually can do them. When we put out something for National Math Labs, which was a tutoring program for kids who were two or more years behind math, we literally brought in statisticians and we randomly sampled the population to be able to figure out if we could measure the statistical size of the gain. So it's happening more and more, and I think there's going to be incredible gains because we're going to be able to use that data.
But you referenced this, I'm sorry, but just to feed on what Ron was saying in the question, what's really amazing about where technology's at, where data's at, is you're seeing real adaptive software. I mean, there's an investment we've made in a company called Dreambox, and Ron's good friends with the CEO, Jesse Woolley Wilson. But at every single click, Dreambox focused on K-6 math. Every single click, that the game that they're playing to learn math is being more individualized for that student, getting smarter with every single click, adapting where they're proficient and where they're deficient, and also providing the teacher and a parent the information about what's actually going on a real-time basis. That's incredible, right? And that's the world. That's possible today. That's happening today, and that's exciting.
For us, we use data in every part of our business. Great thing about these tablets is they log what the child is doing and how long they're spending on it. And then all that data is then fed into a back end. So we can very quickly see how children are learning. I think I come back to personalization, because I think personalization is critical. I really do. At Leapfrog, we celebrate the fact that every child is unique. Children learn at different rates. They have different interests. And yet we have a school system that's trying to make sausages. And I think that's really tough. If you imagine a class of 20 kids, you're trying to teach those kids some of different interest levels, different academic standards, and you're having to teach them all at the same time. The advantage of technology linked with metrics is you can then deliver these personal learning journeys. So the auto level. So I'll give you a great example of this. We pioneered in electronic ebooks. A children's book is really a combination of some beautiful art and a great story, copy. We've created these ebooks with 3 levels of copy for every page. And as the child is reading that book and going through it, the computer is defining metrics through it that deliver the right level for the child. So it grows with you right in front of the child there. That's how you develop really effective learning as you go forward. Now, on the other side, as a parent, I have to confess, I love science. I love math. I'm Scottish, right? But metrics are really tough to measure: art and music and creativity. So I think it's about finding balance. I think we want our children, to be great at math, to be great at English, that we can have every kind of metrics we can look at in science. But I also think we want our children to appreciate the finer things of art and music and creativity, because it's that left brain, right brain thing that I think has made America famous and incredibly powerful. And if we go too much one way, we will miss the other way. So I think the message from a Leapfrog standpoint is it's about balance. It's the art and the science working together to deliver these more holistic learning experiences for children.
The other thing that technology can do, when he was describing the children's book being great art and text, in what language? Because I do believe we're in a global community in which language is going to be really important. And so the technology is going to allow us to bridge a lot of gaps between different languages and learning English as a second language and Chinese and what have you. And I believe that you'll see these things integrating in a very, very seamless way before our eyes, so that we can almost go to anywhere in if you look at the horizontal axis being all the subjects of man, the vertical axis, the difficulty from pre-K to post-grade, the z-axis is cultural and language. And every one of those vertices has a learning module, has a content to it. And once it's organized in that fashion, you can go up, down, over, and hit something that is either aspirational, I want to learn this in Chinese, or regular, I'm already an English speaker, I want to learn it in English. And And I think that we can organize the knowledge of man in that structure, and it'll be massively powerful because you might learn new nuances, because we know that language is the vessel of thought. And very often, if you know two languages, you can get additional understanding by seeing an articulation in a different language.
So let's take that concept around learning in different languages and understanding and invert it a bit and,
Right.
and think about international opportunities. The discussion has been largely focused around, a developed markets perspective, U.S. perspective. It's a global conference. How do you think about taking your kinds of products in different languages, you're at 20 languages now, to markets around the world? And are there other things that need to be modified within the products that reflect either differences in how different cultures learn, cultural preferences, behavioral norms?
You got to be very careful. I mean, there are language and cultural sensibilities that I can remember the old saw, a rolling stone gathers no moss. Turns out in English, there's about 7 interpretations of that thing. And when you go internationally, it really goes bad. I used to give a lot of speeches internationally where, you have the headset. And part of my speech thing is to tell jokes. Some of them just laid certain eggs. You could not tell a joke that could both tantalize the Italians and make the Germans laugh. You just couldn't do it. And so you clearly have an awful lot of cultural sensibilities that you have to deal with. But, there are 250 million English language learners in China. Is that a market I want? Yeah. And this is all really, really fun, and I think that that integration across all these boundaries, I think all of us are going to get smarter because of it.
When you you talk about the ubiquitous infrastructure, ubiquitous technology, and the networks. I mean, some of the cooler businesses and successful businesses teaching English from Wyoming to China using Skype.
Yeah.
I mean, that's pretty powerful. But one just observation, and I think this is definitely true, I think, across technology, but I think it's also true in education, is that historically, the way a business worked is you kind of started locally, and if you're successful locally, then you went regional, and if you're successful regional, then you went national, and if you're really successful, you go global for very few. Today, companies are starting with the idea that they're global, right? Yeah. I mean, because locally, they won't use it unless there's a global market. Yeah. And I think that's a really interesting shift that's taken place.
Ron, what's your experience been? I mean, one of the things that I've seen change most about K-12 in the last 5 years is it's just how dramatically global it's become.
It is, and we've now have a lot of, we have a hybrid school in Dubai, and we have a school in Switzerland, and we've opened up a school in the UK now. And I think technology will have even more of an impact abroad than it will have domestically. And it's just like cellular telephones, right? They leapfrogged landlines. I mean, if you have a lot of money, you can pour it into brick and mortar infrastructure. If you have less, you might want to put it into the learning process itself. And so I think we're going to see, you listen to India this morning, there's a couple 100 million kids who aren't in school at all. Mm-hmm. So to be able to deliver, education to anywhere in India at a low cost, I think it's going to have a massive effect on the education of the population. So we look to have even bigger effects abroad. But one of the really cool things that we really are proud of at K-12 is you can now get a U.S. accredited high school education, live anywhere in the world where you have access to basically a phone line. So we now have kids in 85 countries that are enrolled in our private high schools getting U.S. high school diplomas on every continent but Antarctica. So it just shows you the power. I mean, how powerful is that you could be in China and get a U.S. accredited high school diploma? And
Absolutely.
So we think that's going to be a big thing, and that business is growing quite rapidly.
I think the devil's in the details, though.
Yeah.
Let's not kid ourselves. England's pretty close to America, although most people don't tend to think so at times when they
Different language.
when they hear me speak, right? But you've got different education systems, you've got different cultures, you've got different languages. If you're in a content business that delivers education, which a lot of education is content, the devil's in the details. I mean, I can tell I'm just back from Germany and Austria this week, and the look at education and the way that kids look at education is quite different than here. One of the advantages we have, scary, is that People are dissatisfied with the education they're getting in schools here. In France, nobody's dissatisfied. Education in France is perfect, right? Ask the French, they'll tell you that, right? In all sincerity. So there's the devil's in the details. I wish I could tell you from our standpoint that moving into other marketplaces is super easy. I'm sure lots of our investors would like to hear that. But to do it properly, to sweat the details and really deliver life-changing education, you have to be incredibly sensitive to the local education systems and the local culture and the local language. Because if you're not, you know, I love McDonald's too. But a hamburger's a hamburger's a hamburger, whether you have it in Hong Kong or Japan, right?
Right.
My joint venture partner when I was at Toys R Us was Den Fujita, who built the McDonald's business in Japan. Education's a lot different. And as I say, I wish it was easier, but the devil's in the details. If you really want to change children's lives, you really want to deliver those situations, then you got to deliver a product that's right for each marketplace. Unless you want to teach everybody American. And I'm not sure that's what everybody wants around the world.
No, I think one of the things that technology we should be afraid of is I don't think we need hybrid seeds. We don't want a uniformity across all cultures and all people. We want a diversity of aspects and things like that. That'll make for a stronger, I mean, we want to be all mongrels, you know. and I think that uniformity, like if all of a sudden we find one particular pathway is highly effective, big data, you know, I'm not sure that's actually good. You know, because we want to have some divergent thinking going on somewhere, maybe.
Absolutely.
We've got a couple minutes left. Let's check if there's any questions from the audience. Yes, sir.
Nolan, can you speak a little bit about how Brainrush compares to Rosetta Stone or why anti-aging games is so effective?
The question was Brainrush versus Rosetta Stone and anti-aging games in terms of efficacy. It's really about brain science. We know things, spaced repetition algorithms work. Our brains are designed to forget, not to remember. And so there has to be a certain amount of repetition. Second of all, we need a time frame. Why? Well, in video games, you use time to hyper-focus the player. Time hyper-focuses the student. And anytime you have an effective learning game, you need a time component. And you mess with the time component, because some kids are going to be slower than others. Some are going to be faster. And you say, well, why can't you just have it set to the slowest setting? Because you will bore the better students. So you really got to keep the pressure on them. If you can't get just a little bit of adrenaline, you're really messing up. The third issue is active. Active. How many times do you have to click? Like in anti-aging games, when you're making the pizza, you have to be active. And if you don't, you're not building your brain. You know, and so we have two problems at two edges of the spectrum. One of them is, as we get older, you know, there's a lot of people that are going to get old someday. Not me, but some people will. And they're going to need to have good mental capabilities for the rest of their life. Turns out that a lot of that same technology that we worked on with anti-aging games is totally adaptable to 3-year-olds, because it's all brain building and, you know, dendrites and axon growth and all that good stuff. And so you want to have spaced repetition algorithms, highly active, hyper-focusing based on time. What's the third one? Schema. What's that? Turns out that if you can develop some kind of a framework in which you can hang the piece of data on, you can learn it sometimes 10, 15 times better. For example, if you're into baseball, if you can frame the question in terms of baseball, the schema, boom, works faster. So can you discover the appropriate schema for any kid and then hang the ornaments on that tree? It blows up your efficacy. Anyway.
Simon.
Thank you. Love to pick up on the thread around higher education. in particular. You just barely touched upon it, but with private liberal arts colleges costing $60,000 a year, I mean, is that model really sustainable, and how is technology going to really disrupt that part of the
Yeah,
model?
the short answer, it's not sustainable, and I think what's going to happen, in a industry which basically has seen tuition go up 6% per year for the last 30 years, when inflation is 2%, and all the things I alluded to, I think with access and the new models and so forth, you're going to see a lot of liberal arts schools go away. That's going to happen, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think it's a reality, and it's about creating higher ROE. And by the way, from an investment standpoint, we think to create the highest IRR for our investments, we're going to be investing in the companies with the highest ROE, right? The ones that deliver the most scalable impact for return on education.
So it looks like our session's over, but happy to take questions after outside. Ron, Mike, Nolan, John, thank you very much. Thanks everybody here for participating. Appreciate it.